is Cam Weiland, and you're listening to the 11th episode of the Wordplay Podcast. A fast week zipped by here. I experienced internet problems and a cascade of various tech men, who finally contrived among the lot of them to replace my external wireless card with an internal one, and thereby hopefully solve the problem. So far, so good. Still plugging along on my trailer. We're about half done with the preliminary edit, and I'm very pleased with how things are coming together. This week we hope to finish the prelim edit, purchase picks, and start in on the post-production work. The winning Wednesday prize drawing for the Behold the Dawn mousepad remains open until Tuesday, August 18th at 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time. To enter, answer this week's question. Which of the following was not a common medical practice in the Middle Ages? A. Bleeding. B. Visiting sacred relics. C. Herbs. D. Anesthetics. You can submit your response using the form at the bottom of the left-hand column on my blog at wordplay-kmweiland, that's weiland.blogspot.com, or email it directly to me at km.weiland@ymail.com. Listeners of this podcast can also get a head start on next week's contest, which features the double prize of a beautiful Behold the Dawn keychain and a wordplay pin. To enter, answer the question, at the time of the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, was the use of plate armor prevalent? Be sure to check the blog every week for new winners and new prizes. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or complaints, please feel free to contact me on my website at kmweiland.com or my blog at wordplay-kmweiland.blogspot.com. That said, please enjoy this week's recording. Backstory: the importance of what isn't told. When Ernest Hemingway spoke about the dignity of an iceberg being due to only 1/8 of it being above water, he was speaking about the importance of the part of the story that isn't told. Those 9/8 underwater are the ballast for the tiny bit that juts up to glisten in the sun. And, more often than not, those 9/8 are almost entirely composed of one of the most important, and yet sometimes overlooked, facets of any tale: backstory. Backstory, of course, is basically self-explanatory. It's the story that goes in back of the real story. The story before the story. The unseen history that informs all of your characters' decisions and actions. As such, it's understandably vital to the progression and consistency of your tale. Particularly during this modern trend of beginning stories in medias res, in the middle of things, a deep and full-bodied backstory is every whit as important as the story itself. When I sit down to write a new story, I generally have a basic idea of the major plot points. I know who my heroes are, I know what they're after, I know some of the things they're going to have to accomplish to reach their goal. But my concept of who they are and what, in their individual pasts, has shaped them into the people I need them to be, is often foggy at best. Before I can tell others my story, I have to tell myself its prequel. I began writing my characters' backstories with no other intention than that of figuring out where my story proper needs to go. But the exhilarating part of all this is that usually the backstory takes on a life of its own and transforms my previously shallow concept of my story into something much bigger. The little chunk of ice floating around in my imagination morphs into a looming iceberg. Within backstory, we find the key motivating factors in our characters' lives. The inability to measure up to his younger brother, which fuels Peter Wiggins' anger and ambition in the Ender's Shadow series by Orson Scott Card. The long-harbored guilt for brutal war crimes, which impels Benjamin Martin to avoid war, in the movie The Patriot. The long years of loneliness, which influenced John Barrett to accept the compulsory swapping of roles with his French look-alike, in The Scapegoat by Daphne du Maurier. And, in some lucky instances, the backstory takes over completely, as in Melina McGraw's After Dunkirk and Audrey Niffenegger's The Time Traveler's Wife. The key to crafting stories with many layers, stories with depth and ballast, is to never ignore the blank spaces in your characters. Don't let them get away with telling you only what they must to make the story work. Search out the shadows in their pasts, discover their parents, their childhood friends, their catalysts. Don't just accept that your main character is a cop, find out why he became a cop. Don't just slap a scar on your heroine, discover where the scar came from. At the same time, don't forget that there's a time and a place where backstory belongs, and a time and a place where it doesn't. Sometimes the only person who needs to know the backstory is the author. Vital as this information may be, don't inflict it unnecessarily on your readers. The best backstories are those that influence without obstructing. Just like an iceberg, stories work best when the greater part of them remains submerged. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, visit me on the web at wordplay-kmwyland, that's weiland.blogspot.com, and be sure to listen again next week.